Today, we are diving into a really fascinating scientific paper. It's an analysis of a real object that is, right now, flying through our solar system. Now, the paper's conclusion? It's probably just a rock. But the question it asks along the way is absolutely mind-bending. What if it's not?
So let's get right into it. The whole discussion revolves around an object named 3I/Atlas. It's only the third interstellar object we've ever spotted. It was picked up by the Atlas survey. That's the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Blast Alert System. But the authors of this paper are asking a really provocative question. What if this visitor from another star isn't natural at all?
So let's just set the stage here. We are talking about an object that has traveled across the unbelievable emptiness between stars just to get here. I mean, that alone is an incredible opportunity for science. But, as astronomers started collecting data on this thing, 3I/Atlas started to look, well, a little weird.
Now, we've had interstellar visitors before, right? You've probably heard of Oumuamua and Borisov. But as the authors of this paper, Hibbard, Crowell, and the famous astronomer Avi Loeb point out, 3I/Atlas has this whole list of strange characteristics that just makes it stand out from the crowd.
And this is where things get really, really interesting. The authors propose what they call a testable hypothesis. Now, they're not screaming it's aliens from the rooftops. Not at all. Instead, they're just laying out a scientific case for why we should at least consider the possibility. They frame it as a pedagogical exercise, basically a thought experiment that's grounded in real data.
Yeah, this paper does not pull any punches. The central idea they're exploring is that 3I/Atlas could actually be a piece of technology, maybe even with some kind of active intelligence. And they take it one step further, suggesting that if it is technology, we should consider the possibility that it could even be hostile, which raises a pretty big question. Why on earth would they even suggest that?
Well, to answer that, the authors bring up something called the dark forest theory. It's a pretty grim solution to the Fermi paradox. The famous question of, if the universe is so big, where is everybody? The theory imagines the universe as a giant, dark forest. Every civilization is like a silent hunter, terrified to make a sound. Because to shout, hey, I'm over here, might just be an invitation for a predator to come find you. So in a universe like that, any probe you send out would have to be stealthy, cautious, and probably ready for the worst.
Okay, so with that chilling thought in mind, let's actually look at the evidence. The paper lays out a whole series of anomalies that, when you put them all together, they paint a very, very curious picture. Let's treat it like a detective's case file. All right, clue number 1, the object's path. This thing isn't just zipping through the boring, empty parts of our solar system. No, its trajectory takes it surprisingly close to 3 major planets: Venus, Mars, and the big one, Jupiter. As the paper points out, it's kind of like a tourist making sure to hit all the major landmarks on its trip.
And here's the kicker. The sheer unlikeliness of this is what's so wild. The authors actually calculated the odds of a random object just happening to line up so perfectly with Venus, Mars, and Jupiter. And the answer they got? A staggeringly tiny 0.005%. That is a 1 in 20,000 chance. Kind of makes you go, right?
Now for the next clue, which is just as suspicious. The object's perihelion, that's its closest flyby of the Sun, is going to happen on October 29, 2025. And at that exact moment, from our point of view here on Earth, it will be perfectly hidden behind the Sun. We won't be able to see it at all.
And once again, the paper runs the numbers. The probability of this happening by chance during this specific time when the Sun blocks our view is only about 7%. So, just to recap, we have a 1 in 20,000 chance event, followed by roughly a 1 in 14 chance event. These coincidences, they're really starting to stack up.
So this table here lays out the whole case file. We've already talked about the strange trajectory and that perfectly timed perihelion, but just look at the other stuff. Its orbital plane is almost perfectly lined up with ours, which is weird enough, but it's also retrograde. It's flying against the flow of traffic, so to speak. It shows 0 signs of being a comet, no gas, no dust. And if it's just a big, dark rock, it would have to be enormous, something like 20 kilometers wide, making its appearance a massive statistical long shot compared to all the smaller stuff out there.
So, if we just play along for a minute and say these aren't just a bunch of wild coincidences, what could it all mean? If this thing is a probe, what's its game plan? And why would hiding behind the Sun be so darn important?
This is where the physics get really cool. The paper talks about something called a reverse solar Oberth maneuver.
Okay, simply put, the absolute most fuel-efficient way for a fast-moving spacecraft to hit the brakes and get into orbit around a star is to fire its engines when it's moving its fastest, which is right when it's closest to the sun. And for 3I Atlas, that moment happens at the exact same time it's hidden from us. I mean, you couldn't ask for a more perfect cover.
So let's just walk through this timeline. The object gets discovered, then, in late October, it gets this golden opportunity to perform a maneuver completely hidden from our view. The paper then calculates that if it did that maneuver to target Earth, the best time for it to arrive would be late November or early December of 2025. It makes this whole hypothetical scenario feel very, very close. The paper also looks at the energy it would take for this object to change course. That's measured in something called delta V, which is basically just the amount of push it needs. And as this chart shows, getting to Mars or Jupiter would only take a relatively small push, something totally within the reach of our current rocket technology. Now, Earth is a harder target, but it's not impossible, especially if it pulls off that sneaky Oberth maneuver.
And get this, it might not even need a powerful rocket engine. The paper also calculates that the tiny, continuous push you'd need to nudge it towards Jupiter could be done with a solar sail that's only 1 micrometer thick. That is similar to technology we are literally developing right now. So the tech required here isn't some crazy, impossible fantasy.
Okay, we've walked through all the suspicious evidence and the potential covert strategy. It's a really compelling story, almost sounds like a movie plot. But now we have to take a step back and look at this whole thing through the clear, sober lens of the scientific process. What's the real verdict here?
This right here is arguably the most important slide of them all. The authors themselves state their position very, very clearly. They call the paper a pedagogical exercise, and they flat out say that by far the most likely explanation is that 3I Atlas is just a natural object. The whole alien probe idea is what we call an extraordinary claim, and that requires extraordinary evidence, which, let's be honest, we just don't have.
But, and this is a big but, what makes this good science and not just some wild fan fiction is that the hypothesis is actually testable. The paper lays out crystal clear predictions. If we see it make a maneuver after it comes out from behind the sun, or if we measure a specific kind of acceleration that isn't from gravity, that would be huge. And of course, if something actually shows up at Earth, well, that would pretty much settle it, wouldn't it?
Look, the really crucial point here is that even when 3I/Atlas almost certainly turns out to be a totally normal, if slightly weird object, this whole exercise was not a waste of time. Not at all. What these authors have really done is create a framework, a kind of playbook for how to analyze future interstellar visitors for any signs of technology. They've asked all the what-if questions ahead of time so that we are ready for the next one.
So at the end of the day, this is a story about being prepared. 3I/Atlas is a string of coincidences that are almost certainly just coincidences, but it forces us to ask a really important question. The next time a visitor from the stars shows up, we're going to have more data, we're going to have better tools. So if one day an object arrives with a list of weird things this long, or maybe even longer, will we be ready to seriously consider what it might actually be?